It all began with a simple letter in the mail, the kind you almost throw away without opening. It was from the county's development office, notifying me about construction updates near my property line. I hadn't planned any construction, so I was curious. My ranch sat on nearly 100 acres of untouched land, rolling hills, tall pines, and a quiet stream that marked the boundary. Nothing ever happened out here. When I drove down the old dirt road to see what the letter was talking about, I expected maybe a small project or someone putting in a new fence. What I found instead left me speechless. Bulldozers were cutting deep tracks through my land. Piles of gravel were being dumped, concrete foundations were taking shape, and bright orange stakes dotted the landscape like scars across the earth. A massive sign read, "Future site of Willow Creek Estates, managed by the Willow Creek HOA." At the bottom, in shiny letters, it said Karen Douglas, HOA President. I just stood there, staring at that sign, my mind trying to process what I was seeing. My land, my private property, was being torn apart for a housing development. I drove closer and flagged down one of the workers. "Hey! Who authorized this construction?" I shouted over the noise of the machinery. The man pointed toward a group of people in hard hats standing near a white trailer. I parked and stormed over, still in disbelief. A woman in her 50s, wearing sunglasses and holding a clipboard, turned to me with an air of annoyance. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Yeah," I said sharply. "You can start by explaining why your crew is digging up my property." She smirked, clearly used to giving orders, not taking them. "This is the new Willow Creek Estates expansion," she said proudly. "The HOA approved it months ago." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Lady, this isn't your land. It's mine." She chuckled. "Oh, I think you're mistaken. The HOA acquired this section from the county years ago. It's part of our planned community now." I didn't bother arguing further. I told her my name, gave her the parcel number, and said, "You're going to regret not checking your maps." Her expression flickered, just for a second, but she quickly recovered and waved me off. "If you have a concern, take it up with the county," she said. "We're not stopping construction." By the time I got home that night, I was furious. I dug out my property deeds, maps, and the original survey documents from when I bought the land 15 years ago. Every line, every coordinate matched what I remembered. The development site was well within my boundary. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office. The clerk pulled up the latest records, and sure enough, my property was fully intact. No sale, no easement, no transfer. But then she frowned. "That's strange," she said. "The HOA filed for a building permit based on an old map from before your property lines were updated." My stomach dropped. An outdated survey had shifted the boundary markers by almost 100 yards, and the HOA had used that to justify building on my land. I asked her how something like that could happen, and she shrugged. "Mistakes like this usually get caught early," she said. "Unless someone was in a rush or didn't bother verifying ownership." Over the next week, I watched as more trucks rolled in, more houses started going up, and more of my land disappeared under concrete. They were building fast, like they knew time wasn't on their side. I went back to the site, this time with copies of my documents in hand. Karen was there again, overseeing things like a self-appointed queen. I walked straight up to her and handed her the papers. "You're trespassing," I said flatly. "This is all mine, and you're building without authorization." She glanced over the papers, smirking again. "You should be thanking us," she said. We're raising your property value. You're destroying my property, I corrected. And if you don't stop, I'll see you in court. She laughed, clearly not taking me seriously. You won't win, she said. We've already sold half these lots. It's too late. That night, I called my lawyer, and within 48 hours, we had filed a cease and desist order. Construction had to stop immediately until ownership could be clarified. The county officials came out, along with the survey team, to inspect the site. It didn't take long for the truth to come out. Every single home foundation, every street they had paved, every sewer line, they were all on my property. The HOA had built 98 homes on land that didn't belong to them. The county suspended all permits and launched an investigation into how the project had been approved without verifying the titles. News spread quickly through the community. Buyers who had put down payments on homes started demanding answers. Karen tried to calm everyone down, claiming it was just a clerical mix-up, but her confident tone was gone. The moment the official survey results were made public, it was over for her. The HOA's lawyer tried to negotiate a quick settlement, offering to buy the land from me at market value, but I wasn't interested in selling. This was more than just about money, it was about principle. They had trampled on my rights, destroyed my land, and acted like they owned it. I wanted them held accountable. The more I looked into it, the clearer it became that Karen had personally pushed the project through without proper oversight, rushing it so she could take credit for expanding the HOA's reach. She had bullied her way through meetings, ignored objections, and even forged signatures to fast-track approval. When that evidence came to light, her supporters vanished. She went from being the self-proclaimed savior of the community to the woman responsible for its biggest scandal. Standing at the edge of the property one evening, I watched as the construction site fell silent for the first time in weeks. The machines were gone, the workers dismissed, and the half-built houses stood empty and still under the fading light. It was strange, an entire neighborhood built on a foundation of arrogance and lies. My land looked scarred, but I knew it would heal. Karen had made a mistake thinking I was just another landowner who would back down or settle quietly. She had no idea who she was dealing with. I had the patience, the paperwork, and the resolve to make sure justice was done. This was my land, and no HOA bully was going to take that away from me. As I locked the gate that night, I glanced once more at the rows of unfinished homes. They thought they were building a community, but what they were really building was their own downfall. I smiled to myself, knowing that by the time this was over, those 98 homes and everything they stood for would legally belong to me. And there was nothing Karen could do to stop it. The fallout from the discovery hit the neighborhood like a bomb. Within days, the news spread across every local channel, and HOA had illegally built nearly 100 homes on private property. Reporters camped out near the gated entrance, interviewing angry homeowners who suddenly realized their dream houses were sitting on land that didn't legally belong to them. The HOA board scrambled to contain the chaos, but the truth was undeniable. Every inch of those houses, roads, and driveways stood on my property, and I now had the power to decide what happened next. Karen tried to play damage control, giving a press statement about a miscommunication between county offices, but she looked nervous, her voice shaking as she spoke. Everyone knew this was her doing. She had rushed the project, ignored warnings, and signed off on everything without verifying the land ownership. The same arrogance that made her so powerful in the HOA was now destroying her reputation piece by piece. Meanwhile, I met with my lawyer and a few county officials to discuss the next steps. They confirmed that legally, those houses were on my land and that every buyer's deed was invalid. It was a nightmare for the new homeowners, but not my fault. You're well within your rights to demand they vacate, my lawyer said, sliding a folder of documents toward me. Or you can negotiate a purchase at your terms. I nodded but didn't respond immediately. I wasn't sure yet how far I wanted to push this. Part of me wanted to bulldoze everything and make a point. Another part of me felt bad for the families who had bought homes in good faith, not knowing the woman running their HOA had built them on stolen ground. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let Karen or her cronies walk away without paying for what they'd done. The next morning, I took a drive through the new subdivision. The half-finished houses looked like ghosts, silent and empty. A few residents stood outside, talking in small groups, their faces pale with anxiety. When they saw me, some waved hesitantly. One man walked up to my truck. "You're the property owner, right?" he asked cautiously. I nodded. "Yeah. I'm the one whose land they built on." He sighed and rubbed his forehead. "We had no idea. We were told everything was approved. My wife and I just moved in last month." I could see the frustration in his eyes. These people had been lied to, manipulated by the very HOA that was supposed to protect them. "I'm not after you," I told him. "But the people responsible for this mess, they're going to answer for it?" He nodded slowly, grateful but still worried. "I hope so," he said before walking back toward his house. Later that week, the HOA called an emergency meeting at their clubhouse. Despite not being a member, I decided to attend. The room was packed, tension thick in the air. Karen sat at the front, pale and defensive, trying to keep control of the situation. "Let us all remember," she said loudly, "this is just a misunderstanding. The county has made errors before, and we'll get this resolved quickly." I stood up in the back of the room, holding a folder of documents. "It's not a misunderstanding," I said, my voice cutting through the murmurs. "You built an entire subdivision on private land." "My land?" Heads turned, whispers spread through the crowd. Karen's face went red. "You have no right to be here," she snapped. "This is an HOA matter." "You made it my matter," I replied. "And everyone here deserves to know the truth." I handed copies of the official survey and property deed to a few residents sitting nearby. "These are the county verified maps," I explained. "The land you're standing on, every lot, every road, it belongs to me." The room erupted in chaos. People shouted questions, others demanded refunds, and Karen looked like she might faint. A few days later, I received a call from an attorney representing the HOA. They wanted to meet privately to discuss a settlement. I agreed but made sure to bring my lawyer with me. The meeting took place in a conference room downtown, with Karen sitting across the table, her confidence long gone. Her voice was quiet now, almost pleading. "We want to make this right," she said. "The homeowners are innocent. The HOA can compensate you for the land use if you're willing to transfer ownership." I leaned back in my chair. "And how exactly would you pay me for 98 lots of prime real estate?" She hesitated before replying, "We can offer market value." I cut her off. "Market value doesn't cover what you did. You destroyed my property without permission. You trespassed, built over protected land, and then tried to cover it up. That's not just a mistake, it's criminal negligence." Her attorney shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing how weak their position was. My lawyer slid a document across the table. "Here's our counter-offer," he said. "The HOA will pay a fine of $5 million for illegal development, and every homeowner will have the option to lease the land from my client under a 50-year agreement. Otherwise, they vacate within 6 months. Karen looked like she might break down. "You can't do this," she whispered. "We'll lose everything." I met her gaze. "You already did." The meeting ended in silence. Within a week, the HOA board resigned in disgrace, leaving Karen alone to face the legal consequences. The county began its own investigation into her actions, uncovering fraudulent permits and fake signatures she had used to push the project through. She was charged with multiple counts of fraud and falsifying public records. Meanwhile, I began working with the remaining homeowners to establish a fair lease system so they wouldn't lose their homes. Most were grateful and cooperative, and I made sure they knew I wasn't out to ruin their lives just to make sure justice was done. As the weeks passed, the construction site transformed from chaos to calm. The county sent inspectors to remove illegal infrastructure and reroute the utilities properly under my supervision. I even hired local contractors to help restore the parts of the land that had been damaged beyond repair. Slowly, the place began to look like part of my property again, though the scars of the bulldozers and heavy equipment would take time to fade. The homeowners started planting gardens, repairing fences, and trying to move on with their lives. The HOA sign that once stood proudly at the entrance was taken down, replaced by a simple wooden post that read "Private Property, Managed by Landowner." It was a small change, but it felt symbolic, like order had finally been restored. One afternoon, as I was inspecting the edge of the property, I saw Karen for what would be the last time. She stood near the road, looking exhausted and defeated. Her once perfect posture was gone, replaced by slumped shoulders and hollow eyes. She didn't say anything at first, just stared at the rows of houses she'd once claimed as her triumph. "You destroyed me," she finally said quietly. "No," I replied evenly. "You destroyed yourself." She didn't argue. She just nodded slowly, turned around, and walked away. Watching her leave, I felt no anger, just closure. She had taken so much from me, but in the end, I had reclaimed not only my land but also my peace. When the sun dipped below the horizon that evening, I stood at the edge of the field overlooking the houses that now legally rested under my ownership. The air was calm, the silence broken only by the sound of crickets and the distant laughter of families settling into their new homes. It struck me how ironic it was the HOA had tried to claim my property, but in the end, I owned theirs. I smiled to myself, knowing that the land would always remember the truth, even when people tried to rewrite it. The courtroom was silent when the judge read his decision. Every word felt like the final nail in the coffin for Karen's empire. The ruling was simple and devastating for her: all 98 homes, every square foot of pavement, and every inch of land they rested on belonged entirely to me. There was no loophole, no delay, no appeal that could undo what she'd done. Karen sat frozen in her chair, her lawyer whispering frantically beside her, but it was useless. She had overstepped her authority, falsified permits, and ignored every warning sign along the way. The homeowners looked stunned, whispering among themselves, unsure what would happen next. I didn't take any pleasure in seeing their faces filled with fear, but I felt a deep, unshakable satisfaction knowing justice had finally caught up to the woman who had tried to take everything from me. When the gavel fell for the last time, the courtroom erupted in mixed reactions: shock, anger, and disbelief, but I remained still, calm, and quietly victorious. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, firing questions as cameras flashed. "Do you plan to evict the homeowners?" one asked. "Will the HOA appeal?" shouted another. I ignored most of them until one reporter, a local journalist who had covered the story since day one, asked a simple question: "What are you going to do with the neighborhood now that it's all yours?" I paused for a moment, letting the weight of the question sink in before answering. "I'll do what the HOA never could," I said. "I'll make it right." That was the truth. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about control, respect, and reclaiming what was mine while giving those who had been caught in Karen's mess a fair chance to rebuild. Over the next several weeks, I met individually with the homeowners. Some were furious, some were terrified, and others were simply confused. They had no idea that the land their houses stood on was never owned by the HOA in the first place. I showed them the paperwork, explained the ruling, and laid out their options. They could either vacate within 6 months or sign a long-term lease agreement directly with me. To my surprise, most chose to stay. They were tired of being manipulated by Karen and the HOA board. They wanted peace, stability, and someone they could trust to handle things transparently. I promised them fair treatment and kept my word. Each lease was drafted carefully, with clear terms that protected both sides. For the first time since the community was built, people actually felt secure. As word spread, Karen's downfall became the talk of the entire county. The once feared HOA president who used to control every lawn, mailbox, and paint color now had nothing. She had been ousted from the board, stripped of her position, fined heavily by the court, and left to face a mountain of lawsuits from the very homeowners she had deceived. Every week, another report surfaced about her trying to sell her assets to cover her legal fees. She'd gone from a woman who wielded power with arrogance to someone barely holding her life together. I didn't take joy in her suffering, but I couldn't deny the poetic justice. She had tried to take my land, and now she didn't even own the ground beneath her feet. The HOA, or what remained of it, officially dissolved a month later. A few of the remaining board members contacted me and asked if they could transfer any remaining documentation, just to close things properly. I agreed and signed the necessary papers. The organization that had once tried to bully me into submission no longer existed. The gates were taken down, the old HOA signs removed, and the neighborhood was reclassified under a new name, one chosen by the residents themselves. They called it Silver Ridge, a nod to the natural beauty of the valley rather than the artificial control of the HOA. As for me, I decided to keep the land and manage it personally. I worked with a few local contractors to repair the damage left behind by construction and neglect. Roads were repaved, drainage fixed, and a small park was built near the entrance. The residents began organizing community barbecues and cleanup days, something that would be been unthinkable under Karen's rule. The atmosphere changed completely. Instead of constant surveillance and fines, there was laughter, cooperation, and mutual respect. People who once feared their HOA now enjoyed their neighborhood again. It was amazing what could happen when control was replaced with understanding. One afternoon, while overseeing a crew installing new streetlights, I spotted a familiar car parked on the edge of the property. It was Karen's. She stepped out slowly, dressed casually but looking tired, her hair tied back and her shoulders hunched. For a moment, she just stood there, watching the workers and the families walking their dogs. When she finally saw me, she hesitated, then walked over. I didn't say anything at first, just waited. "I didn't come here to fight," she said quietly. "I just wanted to see it, one last time." There was a hint of sadness in her voice, a tone I'd never heard before. "You built something impressive," I admitted, "but you did it the wrong way." She nodded, staring at the freshly laid pavement. "I thought I could control everything," she said softly. "I thought rules were what kept people in line. Turns out, I was just keeping them miserable." I didn't respond. She didn't need my forgiveness, she needed to live with what she'd done. After a long silence, she said, "Take care of it, will you? The land, the people." I looked her in the eye and said, "I already am." She gave a weak smile, turned back to her car, and drove away. That was the last time I ever saw her. Months later, the community had transformed into something unrecognizable. The grass was green, kids played outside, and neighbors who once glared at each other across fences now shared meals on porches. It wasn't just land anymore, it was a living, breathing place that people truly cared about. Sometimes, I'd sit on a hill overlooking the entire development and think about how strange it all was. Karen's greed had nearly destroyed everything, yet it also set in motion the events that gave me back what was rightfully mine. Without her arrogance, none of this would have happened. The irony wasn't lost on me. She had built 98 homes on my land thinking she was expanding her empire, but in the end, she built my future instead. I now owned not just property, but an entire thriving community. The leases brought in steady income, the land was secure, and the people who lived there were genuinely happy. I had turned a disaster into something good, something lasting. And every time I walked the quiet streets at sunset, I felt a deep sense of peace. Sometimes, people ask me if I ever plan to sell the land or turn it into another development. My answer is always the same: no. This place has history. It's a reminder of what happens when greed meets truth, when arrogance crashes into ownership, and when someone tries to steal something that isn't theirs. The land remembers. The deeds don't lie. And neither do the lessons carved into every inch of soil beneath those homes. In the end, I didn't need to destroy Karen to win. All I had to do was stand my ground and let the truth do the work for me. The law, the land, and time did the rest. Now, when I stand on that ridge and look out over the valley, I see peace where there was once conflict. The sunset reflects off the rooftops of homes built on the very soil that started the war. And as the wind carries the sound of laughter from the families below, I smile knowing that the land is finally where it belongs with me, the man who owned it all along.